Welcome to Fireside Chats at Heartland Baptist Church. My name is Bob. I'll be your host for this evening. Since it's weird to stand at a pulpit in my kitchen, I'll be sitting down at my kitchen table in my kitchen, which is what I do. Stay tuned for an important message from our sponsors. Is it ready to go?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we'll keep on going here in 2 Samuel, third section here. I think we ended up somewhere in the middle of 2 Samuel chapter 12 last week, talking about how all sin has consequences. So we're in the second half of the book now. The first 10 chapters show David kind of, oh, what? Who could that be? That happens all the time. Let's make room at our table. It's called Tabletop Bible with Bob. Welcome. Welcome, friend.
Wow. I didn't join that, did I?
It's so nice to have you, Brother Galler, and brother at Galler, and sister, brother, sister. You may sit anywhere you desire to sit.
This is so calming. I just need like
Deep thoughts. Let's have deep thoughts. I once had a deep thought in the back of my head, and it was so heavy it made me fall off the ladder backwards. All right. Are we good to go? Now, then nobody wants to get in the picture now. There are actually people here. I'm not making this up. All my people in TV land. Hi, all my people in TV land. So anyways, we're in the second half of 2 Samuel, where David's sin with Bathsheba starts to tumble. And I really would mark this as the downfall of the nation of Israel, although it's said to have peaked around the time of Solomon. But Solomon just continues the downward trends that he learned from his dad. And so these triumphs are interrupted by David's propensity to take things that don't belong to him. And it seems like, this downfall comes because David did this thing with Bathsheba. But what David did really was he disregarded the things that God said. It was really about a disregard for God's word. So we're in the middle of Nathan showing up and telling David he's busted. Because, I got this written down in my Bible. I just never noticed this before. It says, no one will know me. No one will see me. No one can stop me because I'm king. And that's kind of David's attitude. I don't know. I don't even remember writing that, but I did. Well, welcome. Welcome to Bible with Bob. We're sitting in a very informal, intimate setting because I thought I'd just stand and preach to my kitchen table. So I'm preaching to my kitchen table with people.
I love it. Yeah.
And I think Lincoln just got kicked out from the back seats. Oh, he's going away. Okay. That's how this works, huh? Okay. Well, So, wow, you're all here together. How did that happen?
The Lord said, Dallas, you got to get
Dang.
there.
All right.
I don't even have a new Bible.
Whoa.
That was an emotional statement. I'm still getting over it.
Did you get yours?
no, mine keeps getting put on back. I'm the one that had the they got new Bibles.
Maybe yours will come before Sarah's wedding dress.
Dude, no one knows where that thing is.
So anyways. But I digress. Welcome to Bible Time with Bob Gregg. I'm your host this evening. I'm in a mood. I'm staring at the camera very intently. Let me tell you how serious I am. This is a very serious discussion that we're having. Yes. Okay. Like to all of my one viewer out there.
That's us.
That's us, by the way. Yeah, we're the ones viewing. Okay, so anyhow, first half of 2 Samuel, David's winning everything. Unites the whole nation. Everything's going great. Ego kicks in. Pride kicks in. David says, I don't care what God said. I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. Takes Bathsheba, does what he does, and Nathan's in the middle of busting him. We left off in the middle of chapter 12. And we'll get through probably 12, 13, 14, and 15 tonight, because I'm not going to rush. So, and what we learn in what happened? Yeah, so in the rest of chapter 12, what we're going to learn is that even though the consequences of sin are sure, and sin will always find you out, the mercy of God is also sure. Like David did his thing. Let's look at 2 Samuel 12, 24, and 25. And David comforted. So wait a minute, I'm skipping over a whole bunch of stuff. So he takes Bathsheba. She gets pregnant. He kills Uriah the Hittite, lies to cover it up. Nathan calls him out, says, "Thou art the man," and time goes on. This baby is born now, so there's at least 9 months to go on, but the baby dies, and David's lamenting the whole time, and as soon as the baby's dead, David's okay again. And people question him, "Why are you okay with that?" He goes, "Well, the baby's now dead. This is that according, it's, the baby's with God now. Why should I mourn about that?" And it's just showing us a principle, because you'll see this, that the next thing you know, well, we'll get there in a minute. And David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and went into her and lay with her, and she bare a son and called his name Solomon, and the Lord was with him. So God was mad. There was a penalty for sin. David was contrite. When he was confronted with his sin, he gets it, right? If there's anything about David is continuously messing up, but he's always broken by his sin. That's, I think, one of the reasons why God could still call this adulterous murderer a man after his own heart. That's about the only thing I can think of. But suddenly, there's another baby on the way. The baby's dead. The first baby's dead, but now here comes Solomon. And Solomon's, pretty pleasing to God for a while. Wisest man that ever lived, richest man that ever lived. So anyways, and he called his name Solomon, and the Lord loved him. Well, Lord wasn't too happy with the other child, but the Lord loved him. And he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet and called his name Jedediah because of the Lord. That is the only time I can find the word Jedediah used in the Bible. And I'm not sure why. Because of the Lord. Nathan called this guy Jedediah because of the Lord. But at any rate, David's sin had great consequences. And not only the death of his child, but according to chapter 12, verse 10, the sword will never depart from his house. And it never did. So David's sin was forgiven. David's sin is gone in the past now, and he's apparently moving on, but there's a consequence for sin. And unfortunately, most of the times other people pay for this sin. And right now, so far, Bathsheba, Uriah, a baby, and a bunch of other people are about to pay for this sin. But what I'm trying to get at is the consequences of sin will follow David forever, but that doesn't mean his life is over in the ministry. He's still the king of Israel. And I had people tell me this about other people, and they compare it to David. When David did what he did, he never won another battle. I'm like, that's true. He paid for the consequence of his sins, but he was still the king of Israel. He was still the king of Israel. He was still later on called a man after God's own heart. For probably the only reason is that because he was broken by his sin. But David and Bathsheba have another son, and we know him as Solomon. And that's a good thing. And the Lord loved him. So there's that consequence for sin, but it doesn't mean your life's over. You don't need to stop living life for God because you got busted in sin. If you did, there'd be nobody serving. Every church would be empty, and we'd all, just go on to the mountain and die. That's right. So once God deals with the sin, the consequences are there. That's given, but then he moves on. He's not holding it. He's not throwing it up again over and over again. And you find that in verses 26 and 27. And Joab fought against Rabbah and the children of Ammon and took the royal city. And Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah and have taken the city of waters. So once that sin's dealt with, work continues. The work continues. God's not going to stop the battle and turn it the other way now. Things are going on. And it's not, I'll just say this, there's not a whole lot of work being accomplished for God while we're sinning. So while David was doing his thing, and I think for those 9 months, not a lot of work of God was going on in his life. It's when we're done and we're satisfied with our sin that we get caught and chastised, then it's time to move on. But the work continues. There's still work to do. And that's why David wasn't done right there and then. When Nathan said, thou art the man, in every church, synagogue, cult, public place I've ever been to, that would have been the end of David. That's you're it. I mean, they want to cancel. Who's the next one right now? Yeah, Dr. Seuss. I mean, Andrew Cuomo. He's a piece of work, right? But they want to cancel him because he talked rude to girls. Which, talk rude to my girls, I'll cancel you myself. But suddenly, a bad comment ends your life. It just ends your life. You're over. It's over now. You toss some hand sanitizer to someone, and they want to ruin your life. Right? I mean, it's like whatever you do, it's supposed to, it ends your whole life, but not with God. The work continues. We know that if David was in that battle, so I'm leading up to a point. The work of the battle continued while David was gone. God's work will get done. He doesn't need David. He doesn't need Bob Gregg. He doesn't need anybody here. The work continues. David knew there was a battle going on, and he should have been there. And if he had been there, there's a pretty good chance he wouldn't be in the predicament he's in right now. But the battle continues. Joab fought against Rabbah of the children of Ammon. Remember, back in chapter 11, that said at the time when it came to pass, year was expired when the kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab. The kings are going forth to battle. David sent Joab. He stayed home, some sunbathing on the roof. Just happened to catch the eye of, to catch Bathsheba taking a bath. That's basically, just a coincidence. It wasn't. But he was supposed to be at work, in the battle, in the ministry. When you're at work, in the battle, in the ministry, you're less likely to take a Bathsheba trip. You're focused on God's work. It's hard to walk out of a ministry and then go do something wrong. I think you check out of the ministry, you go through the motions of doing the ministry, and then you get busted doing the thing that you're not supposed to be doing. If you know what you're supposed to be doing, you don't have time for this nonsense. Okay. God's going to send messengers to us to alert us to the word. And that's what he does with Joab. Joab sent messengers in verse 28. The sin, I think, had consumed David. And he stayed home. He stayed home from the battle to begin with. And then he made the battle worse by, using the soldiers to kill Uriah. And, basically he had no idea the state of his flock. Joab's calling back home and saying, hey, dude, you need to get out here. What are you doing? Imagine, there's 9 months. So there's a battle in 11:1, the battle starts, the kings go to war, David stays home. In a certain amount of time, probably the very next day, the thing with Bathsheba happens. 9 months later, there's a baby. Now, I'm not going to say that 9 months and 1 day later she conceived another child, but let's just say that, right? So there's another child born, and that child is Solomon. There's 18 months have gone by, at least 18 months. And David's not on the battlefield, and Joab's calling him back. And you got to be listening to them. They're almost like your Nathans. They're going to be people to call you back to where you're supposed to be. Where you been? Well, I don't chase people when they leave our church. I'm like, well, if they leave my church, I run out of family members, essentially. and the only friends I have. So, yeah, that's it. They leave my church, I'm alone. I'll know it. I'll hunt you down, and I'll cook your pets. Okay? I'll find you. But Joab sent messengers back to go get him. While David's off building his strongholds, Joab's throwing down the strongholds of the enemy. Someone's doing the work. God doesn't need us. And David should have been curious. And in my opinion, David's still under the guilt of his own sin. God's moved on. The punishment's happened, but he's contemplating an entire life now of trouble because of what he did. And Joab calls him to the battle. And he knew there was a battle going on, but he had other plans. And sin will leave us stunned for a while. David was stunned. He was just didn't know what to do, right? He just got busted, lost a child. No matter how you look at it, he lost a child. He got embarrassed. The thing he wanted to do most was protect his reputation, not God's. And his reputation was ruined. Everybody knew what he did. And I think he probably should have expected to get killed any minute because there was no sacrifice for what he did. There is no atonement for what he did. That's the grace of God, right? And in verse 28, Joab says, he said, get out here. The battle's going on. I'm about to take this thing. You better get here lest I take the city and it be called after my name. Joab's going, dude, this, you're the king. We're doing this in your name. There's lots of metaphors there. Read this way. Joab's calling David to the battle where he should have been so that when victory came, David would get the credit that God wants him to have. And David's just sitting in a funk at home dealing with the after effects of his sin. Which, again, proves to me that after God deals with our sin, after he deals with our sin, he still desires us to have victories. We're not destined to failure because we got caught up in sin. It's only some of the things I write, it's only other men and women we know who will hold our past sin against us. They're the ones that dredge this stuff up. God doesn't do it. But while God dwelt with David's sin and put it in the past, David has this new son, and now he's back in the battle, and he's going to win. And I wonder how that victory would have felt if he'd been in the battle from the beginning. It's like playing in the 90 game that you win. You don't make a play. You're just out there and you win. My last high school football game that I ever played in, I had a strap on my left shoulder pad break, so I couldn't play. And it was against the crosstown rival, Villa Park High, the high school I wanted to go to, the one with windows. Yeah, and I wanted to beat them so bad. I was really, really happy that we won. But that I remember running onto the field. I'm like, but I didn't play. I was in the victory. We won, right? We got bragging rights, but I didn't play in the game. I was so mad. So there. No, me? Bitter?
Wow.
Yeah, I'm bitter. I will. I'll find you and I'll cook your pets. So looking at verse 29 and 30 in this chapter, 29 and 30. And David gathered all the people together and went to Rabbah and fought against it and took it. And he took their king's crown from off his head, and the weight thereof was a talent of gold, and the precious stone with the precious stones, and it was set on David's head, and he brought forth the spoil of the city in great abundance. And he brought forth the people that were therein and put them under saws, and under harrows of iron, and under axes of iron, and made them pass through the brickland. And thus did he unto all the cities of the children of Ammon. So David and all the people returned unto Jerusalem. Woohoo! Cut them in half, baby. Which leg do you want off first? So the battle's won, victory's achieved. David comes in the bottom of the ninth inning, last pitch, stood there on first base, and yeah, you won. It has to be an empty victory, but it's a victory nevertheless. At least it's a victory. He gathers all the people, brings a posse. Battle's over. Joab already told him that. We're back in verse 27. He says, I'm about to take this city. David runs in at the last minute and gets the credit. And he puts it to him. A guy with zero skin in the game. I don't know. I'm hard on David because I expect more from a guy like David. But then again, I probably need to expect more from me. But the real victory that God wanted David to have was that to be in the battle from the beginning, to lead from beginning to end, and to enjoy all 9 innings of that game. He got the victory, but it had to be empty. I don't know. It just had to be empty. Okay, here we go. Chapter 13 is going to teach us the principle. It's one of my principles. Like father, like son. Like father, not like son. The whole chapter in chapter 13, right? It's kind of like, this is modern day Christianity. How many times have you sinned and then said, hey, sorry, God? And then right back to it. That's what's going on. What David did all of his life, what's his name here? Absalom was watching it. He was watching everything his dad did. And then he did everything his dad did. He did everything. If you look at this and look at 13:1, and it came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar, and Ammon, the son of David, loved her. Well, that's weird. If we get married, can I still call you sis? This must be in southern Israel, in the province of Arkansas, maybe. I don't know. But there's something weird going on there. David had no boundaries. David had no boundaries at all. Whatever David wanted, says it right there. Where did it say it? Oh, come on. It says it. No one will know me. No one will see me. No one can stop me. I'm the king. Well, this is both Ammon and Absalom. They both act like David here, but this one's about Amnon. So David had few boundaries, so his children had few boundaries. Ammon got himself vexed. He got agitated, distressed. In the context of this, we all know what vexed meant. He got vexed. You look there in verse 2, and Ammon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin. And Ammon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. So he's vexed. Like, really? You have to think about this? Well, Dad didn't. Dad didn't think about it. Dad thought nothing about stuff of those matters. Dad had no boundaries. Amnon was born back in 2 Samuel 3, so he's been around for a while. He knew what David had done in his life, so when it comes time to make choices on his own, he just imitated real life. I mean, David never took his sister, but David took anything else he wanted. Amnon wanted something, and he said, well, when David wanted something, he took it, so I'm going to take it too. And he does. We'll see that. God sets boundaries. Men ignore those boundaries. God never changes those boundaries, but somehow we don't want to look at that pattern. We look at the pattern of the people around us. And since they don't have boundaries, we don't have them. And what we'll do is we'll just pull back a little bit from the boundaries of the bad guys. Well, they'll do these things. I won't go quite that far, so I'm okay. And we just gauge ourselves against the boundaries that other people set. And if you stare at a sin or something unedifying long enough, you'll get vexed too. He played with this thought for a while. He didn't just wake up, see her one day and go, wow, I'm vexed. He knew it was a sister. He played with the thought and made it okay. No boundaries. No boundaries lead to the wrong types of friends here in this case. And in verse 3, but Ammon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother. Wow, this is like family deal here, man. And Jonadab was a very subtle man. I wonder who else was subtle. Lincoln, who else was subtle in the Bible? Yeah, the serpent was more subtle than any of the beasts of the field which the Lord God had made, right? If we have boundary problems, we'll likely find ourselves with friends and relatives that have boundary problems. And the local church is a good boundary for kids growing up. We left the church because they had no boundaries for their children. They told us things like, well, they're just going to do it anyways. You might as well let them do it at home. Imagine that. My kid could have been in that car last week. Could have. Maybe. You never know, right? No boundaries. None. Now, it's no guarantee. Local church is no guarantee of having good friends or even good influence. I mean, some of the worst things I've ever seen my own kids come home with from church. I'm like, the worst things that I think have ever happened to you have been at church, by the way. I mean, it's just, but you know what? That's because we were at church so much and we're just people like everybody else. But it's usually the adults and it's not always the kids. But Ammon had a friend. Now, think about this. That chapter, this is what you call a hook. When you see but, that's a hook. The first time I see the word but is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. But Cain was a tiller of the ground. That's it. Okay, now, that's not the first but. Here's the but. In Genesis chapter 2, the word, there's 25 verses. 19 of those verses start with the word and. 2 of them start with the word but. And in Genesis chapter 2, I forgot to write it down. So you're getting all this and. So you go like, and on the seventh day God created, and God blessed the seventh day. And then it goes, these are the generations, blah, blah, blah. Every plant in the field, but there went up amiss. You pay attention to that. Like there's and, but. Then you got and, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat, right? But. There's a hook when you see the word but. But Ammon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother, and Jonadab was very subtle. Where am I? Mm-hmm. Ammon had a friend. I wonder if that's sarcasm on God's part. But Ammon had a friend? Because this guy says, yeah, that's a good idea. Let me give you some advice on how to pull this off. Like, what? A biblical friend would never do that. So this has got to be sarcasm. Ammon had a friend. It would never do that. A biblical friend would do what Nathan did. Said, are you nuts? That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. That's what a real friend would do. But no boundaries led to wrong friends. Wrong friends leads to bad counsel. You find that in verses 3 through 5. I've already read through 4. And he said unto him, why art thou being a king's son? Yes. And he said unto him, why art thou being the king's son lean from day to day? Wilt thou not tell me? And Ammon said unto him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Okay. And Jonadab said unto him, get out of town, man. That's nuts. What are you thinking? No. Lay thee down on thy bed and make thyself sick. And when thy father cometh to see thee, say unto him, I pray thee, let my sister Tamar come and give me meat and dress the meat in my sight, that I may see it and eat at her hand. Oh, I'm so faint. I'm so faint. And what does David do? Oh, you poor baby. Of course I'll give you what you want. You asked, after all, you asked for it. And after all, I have no boundaries. Why should you? Why shouldn't we cater to your every need? And so he does. This is great. First off, though, wrong counsel. Do you think anyone think that Amnon didn't know what Jonadab would tell him? You think there's a chance that he went to that counsel? When you want to go for counsel that you know is wrong, are you going to go to a guy who's going to tell you the right answer, the biblical answer? No. Wrong, wrong, wrong. No boundaries, wrong friends, wrong counsel lead to the really, really wrong answers. When he got vexed, he'd already decided to sin. He vexed himself. Tamar didn't do anything. She protests. She tries to stop this thing from happening in the story. She's not part of this thing any more than Bathsheba was. I mean, you can't blame Bathsheba for what David did. I mean, it's like there's a certain thing in the workplace when a guy of power tries to exert that control over someone else. Like, how do you say no to that? Well, you do, you can, you should, but wrong friends, wrong counsel, wrong actions. In verse 6 through 14, you see what happens. He does what his good friend says, and whatever happens, happens. And nothing is right about this whole passage except Tamar is trying to do the right thing. Tamar is suffering because of her father's lack of boundaries, and her father's lack of raising his kids, and her father's desires being fed no matter what the cost. These are the outcomes of those decisions. The Bible says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Jonadab was no friend. Yeah. Jonadab was no friend. He was a tool of the devil. He was just plain a tool of the devil. And sin snowballs once it starts. It compounds itself. It gets worse and worse and worse. But it started with David. It didn't start with Jesse. Jesse's big sin was he didn't think David could be king. He just left him out in the field and didn't call him in when Samuel came. So, I mean, it wasn't Jesse's fault. Anyways, this is just the beginning of yet another line of swords that follow David through his life as you see the rest of the story play out. And in verse 21, when it's all over, this is great. But when King David heard of all these things, he was very wroth. Really? You never saw that coming? He was wroth. Do as I say, not as I do. That's the phrase that I would put on the bumper sticker on his ox cart. Do as I say, not as I do. I wonder if he was wroth with himself for setting up the whole chain of events. I wonder if he was mad at himself or if he was mad at Amnon and Abinadab. I don't think so. Absalom, later on in the story, goes on and kills Amnon. Probably should have killed Jonadab too. But then it starts to get another chain of unfortunate events. That snowball of sin of David through his whole life is snowballing through his life. And God just I don't think God cursed him to a sword. I think just God observed that it was going to happen and said, the sword will never depart from your life. So by the end of this chapter, Absalom runs off and he's gone for 3 years. And it said there, and David longed to go forth, but he didn't. He didn't go make it right. David just sat there. And then we go into chapter 14. The useful idiot strikes again. This is Joab. So Absalom's committed murder. David knows something about murder, being one himself. Absalom's run away. He's gone for 3 years now. Absalom run away from justice. David, the king of Israel, has a responsibility to show kindness and forgiveness of God, but he doesn't. He longs to do something, but he doesn't. He's a hearer of the word and not a doer. David's supposed to return the favor that God showed him by reconciling Absalom, but Joab is going to use a woman to trick David into doing the right thing. And it's good. I mean, Joab's not the dumbest guy in the class. He knows how to get to David. A woman. He sends a woman in with a story to change David's mind. But David wanted restoration, and we talked about that a couple weeks ago, but he didn't want it bad enough to do it. He just wanted it. It said in verse 14, now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. So he's upset that Absalom's gone. It's his son, right? Like, who wouldn't be secretly, I guess. Read this. God's heart's towards us even when we flee from him in sin. So David's got the heart in the right place. He just doesn't have his actions to follow it up. If you get one thing out of this, it's that God wants reconciliation. But even though David may want it too, he's doing absolutely nothing for it. He doesn't do anything. He just sits there wanting it. And just wanting the right thing to happen is not going to work. It's just a one-sided restoration. Now, even when he does restore Absalom, there's no consequence for what he did. Why? Well, David doesn't like consequences. There are no boundaries. Okay, so then David had to be manipulated into reconciliation. You see that in the first 11 verses. I won't read them all, but this woman goes in with a sob story. Joab gets this woman to go in and lie to David about family where one side wronged the other side and they won't reconcile, and David's all mad again, just like he was when Nathan told him about the guy with the lamb and the rich man took it away. And Joab knows that David wants it, but he also sees that David is not doing anything about it. So he makes a plan, and he goes to his weak spot, a woman. David's weak spot's a woman. And I think we even said this a couple weeks ago. Verses 12 through 24, you see reconciliation kind of not happening. I'll read them. And the woman said, "Let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak one word unto my lord the king." And he said, "Say on." And the woman said, "Wherefore hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God? For the king doth speak this thing as of one that is which is faulty, and that the king doth not fetch home is banished." It was the same thing. David said, "Whoever stole that lamb shall surely die, and restore it sevenfold." And he got all very righteous, and he got very self-righteous with this woman when she gave her fake story. So she's playing the part of a Nathan and calling him out. "For we must needs die, and are as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Neither doth God respect any person, yet doth he devise means that his banished be not expelled from him. Now therefore that I am come to speak unto this thing unto my lord the king. It is because the people have made me afraid, and thy handmaid said, I will now speak this unto the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his handmaid, for the king will hear to deliver his handmaid out of the hand of the man that would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. Then thine handmaid said, the word of my lord the king shall now be comfortable, for as the angel of God, so is my lord the king to discern good and bad. Therefore the Lord thy God will be with thee. Then the king answered and said unto the woman, hide not from me, I pray thee, the thing that I shall ask thee. And the woman said, let my lord the king now speak. And the king said, is it not the hand of Joab with thee in all this? And the woman answered and said, as thy soul liveth, my lord the king, none can turn to the right hand nor to the left hand aught that my lord the king hath spoken. For thy servant Joab bade me, and he put all these words in my mouth of thine handmaid. To fetch about this form of speech hath thy servant Joab done this thing, and my lord is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel of God, to know all the things which are in the earth. Keep going. And the king said unto Joab, behold, now I have done this thing. Go therefore and bring the young man Absalom again. So he's going, okay, go get him. All right, go get him. Don't run to him like the guy did in the prodigal son story. Don't do that. Just go get him and bring him here. And Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. And Joab said, today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my lord, O king, in that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him turn to his own house and let him not see my face. Great. So Absalom returned to his own house, and the king saw not his face. Reconciliation has an enemy, and it's pride. David goes almost all the way. Okay, so they trick him into it, but he goes, okay, it's the right thing to do. So he's getting there, right? But he's only going to go so far. His reconciliation only goes so far. He brings Absalom back, but his pride stops him from reconciliation. Wow, man, what are people going to think of me with my murdering son Absalom? So yeah, bring him back, but don't let him come see me. Let him not see my face. And there's going to be contention. And from Proverbs 13:10, only by pride comes contention, but with the well-advised is wisdom. Maybe David didn't want to be associated with a murderer. I don't know. Really? You realize you're a murderer. But hypocrisy absolutely knows no bounds. It doesn't. When you're a hypocrite, there's no little hypocrisies. It's either they're the complete opposite of each other. You can't be partly hypocritical. Reconciliation has an expiration date. You read through the rest of the chapter to chapter 15, verse 1. Don't But go to, where am I? Chapter 13, 20, yeah. 14, 24, 24, yeah. Go, read in chapter 15, verse 1. And it came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. So this whole time, it's been about 5 years now, that he was gone for 3 years. He's back for 2 years. Still hadn't seen David. And in that time, Absalom does what Absalom will do. He gathers up chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Reconciliation has an expiration date. This guy's now plotting the overthrow of his own dad. It just doesn't go away. Pride begets pride. Pride is sowed. Pride is reaped. Neither David nor Absalom benefited from this incomplete reconciliation at all. In fact, if anything, it's to David's detriment. We know that Absalom chases him out of the city in about a chapter. It's been 5 years with no fellowship. And that lady said in verse 14, it's like water that's spilled. You can't pick it back up again. When you spill water on the ground, it's in the ground. You can't get it back. And when you do these things, there's some things you can't get back. There's some decisions that you make that you can never unmake. Christ did not put an expiration date on our reconciliation. He didn't put an expiration date on when we wanted to get saved, other than the day of your death. That's the expiration date on salvation. But we do. Whatever delay between our knowledge of our sin and the moment of salvation was all on us. The moment I realized that I had sinned and was going to go to hell, and the moment that I got saved, all that time in between was on me. There was no expiration date until my last breath. But David put 5 years in it. He never really drew. Here's the thing: David never really drew a line for his kids because he never drew a line for himself. He never drew the line. And now that Absalom's a grown man and Absalom does something David doesn't want, he's going to draw the line now. I mean, it's too late. It's too late. All those stories we hear pastors talking about, parents that bring their 18-year-old kid to the office and say, I don't know what to do with them. And he says, really? 18 years, and now you bring them to me? It's too much water under the bridge. He never drew that line. And the kid wasn't a kid anymore. So, now David decides to take a hard line. The time to take a stand on whatever, it's not just children, it's now. Because the longer we don't take that stand, there's water that goes under the bridge, no matter what it is. Like I said, that prodigal son went out in disgrace, and he came back just like Absalom. But when the son got part of the way there, the father ran out to get him. He ran out to get him. I will never forget a pastor telling me that when someone leaves his church, he doesn't even bother to call him. I'll never forget that. I'll never forgive it either. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life, that a shepherd of a flock wouldn't go after the one sheep and leave the 100. I just don't get that. But I don't see how a kid can go away and you don't try to get that kid back. I don't get it. But it's not just about children. It's not just about people. It's about the sin that got away and reconciling yourself back to God. God's standing right there. He's willing to meet us more than halfway there. We just got to meet him. He doesn't put conditions on that. But when Absalom came back, his father shunned him. He literally said, let him not see my face. I don't think that Absalom didn't want to. Absalom was told, don't go. And the king wouldn't see him. That was great leadership. But it wound up with Absalom being an entitled, selfish, snowflake millennial. Wow, I was mad. And he was a little bit self-righteous. If you look in verse 14, verse 32, I mean, Absalom gets a little self-righteous, just like David, a little bit vitriolic. Where is it? 14:32. And Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent unto thee, saying, come hither, that I may send thee to the king, to say, wherefore am I come from Geshur? It has been good for me to have been there still. Now, therefore, let me see the king's face, and if there will be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. So I'm like, really? Look, I just want to see my dad. You could have stopped right there. Like, look, if I have iniquity in me, let him kill me. I'm like, that's a little bit self-righteous, but David tended to self-righteousness too. I mean, iniquity, you just killed somebody. Like, you murdered somebody, you ran away. They don't get it. Well, David didn't get it. So why would his son? God is not mocked. In the end, the king kisses Absalom, gives his forgiveness, but he does it with zero accountability, zero cost, Zero biblical principle whatsoever other than, all right, bygones. There's like David sinned, he had a penalty. Absalom sinned, no penalty. So there's always a penalty for sin. And as much as Absalom deserved it, vengeance belonged to the king. Or rather, as much as Amnon deserved, I mean, come on, I'd kill the guy too. But not my place. Not my place. It was the king's place to do it. But Absalom's hard attitude was me first. And God's forgiveness comes with a consequence. It just does. It's not free. Someone had to pay. Someone had to pay for that. Even when we didn't deserve the forgiveness, it was given anyways, and that reconciliation was complete, and God played a part in it. He didn't sit there and go, okay, you're forgiven, but don't come to church anymore. Don't pray to me. I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I don't want anything to do with you. You're a murderer. Anyway, chapter 15. This one's about sheep stealers, and this is what Absalom turns into. Absalom turns into a sheep stealer. And that's one of the results of reconciling Absalom without any consequence at all was that there was no real reconciliation in it. It was like this thing that was between them forever that they couldn't talk about. So you just avoid it. And it just becomes this wedge between the two people. If you got something between someone, get it done, get it out, name it, just deal with it. And if the people don't want to deal with it after that, then you did your part. But they didn't. So you got 5 years of isolation on top of a lifetime of bad example on David's part. And they've turned Absalom into someone with no moral compass whatsoever. He's about to go and try to dethrone his father. And he would have if he got away with it, but he didn't. Absalom is a picture of a steep stealer. A sheep stealer. Someone who wants to lead, but they don't want to do it the right way. They don't want to earn it. Absalom would have been next in line to be king. After David. Solomon wasn't next in line to be king. Absalom was next in line to be king. Now, Amnon would have been before Solomon, but he's dead now. So there's that. So this is like, I want it now. Who's that girl in Charlie and Chocolate Factory? I want it now. Violet Beauregard. Violet Beauregard. I want it now. Here's the thing, verses 1-3. Sheep stealers are always smarter than their leader. This is great. I love reading this in this voice. Okay, and it came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him because he wanted to get there in a hurry. No, 50 men would slow him down. He had horses and chariots, but he had 50 men to run before him. He didn't want to get there quick. He just wanted to get there in style. And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man had a controversy, came to the king for judgment. Then Absalom called unto him and said, of what city art thou? And he said, thy servant is of one of the tribes of Israel. And Absalom said unto him, see, thy matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee. Well, that's not true. It's like, I know that you're just and right. You're a very smart, powerful person, and God knows you're very respected. It's too bad the king really hasn't set up any structure. You should tell me about it. You should tell me. They're always smart. Oh, it's too bad that we don't have structure in the church to help you poor folks. I just if they only called on me, because I'm always the solution, right? Absalom's approach is to throw shade in a backhanded way by inserting himself into the leader's business. When these folks were on their way to the king, he'd intercept them and say things like, too bad there's no one to help you. Maybe I can. I'm the king's son. I'll help you. But he wasn't trying to help anybody. He's gathering up people, sheep stealers. And all they really want to do is be judged. If you look in verse 3, and Absalom said unto him, see, my matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee. Absalom said, moreover, oh, that I were made, oh, that I were made, that I were made judge in the land. Oh. And he does this. I were made a judge in the land of that every man which hath any suit, he stood there like this, or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. I would do him justice. Love me. I want you to love me. He's got men running before him. He's got chariots. He's exuding power. He doesn't want to help people. He just wants to be in charge. He wants to be the judge. He wants to play judge. He wants to be the man who people go to for advice. And that's real power. In some people's mind, that's real power. For me, it's horrifying. For people to like I remember walking around in my last job and looking at 220 people whose every job depended on me. And I'm like, oh God, I couldn't take it. It was horrible. Hated it. And he wants to be the man who people go to for advice. And he wants to project that power with his 50 men for show. It's like a fake it till you make it scheme. And these people people like that don't want to do what they want you to do. All you gotta do is go say, Dad, you need help. But that's kind of what Moses' father-in-law did to Moses. Remember when Moses' father-in-law said, here's what you need to do. You need to appoint captains over this and captains over, and you need to stay away from all this ruling thing. Tell you what, I'll help you out here. It's what's kind of what's going on with, in a backhanded way, what Absalom's doing. Okay. These steep stealers, I can't get it out of my head. These sheep stealers love to be honored. Look in verses 5 and 6. And it was so that when any man came nigh unto him to do obeisance, he wanted obeisance. That's what he really wanted. He wanted obeisance. He wanted people bowing down before him and scraping before him and coming to him and asking for favor. He wanted to be the guy that would be the big man that would grant them their heart's desire. And on this, and he put forth his hand, and he took him and kissed him. And on this manner did Absalom do to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So I'm not making this up. He's stealing sheep. He's stealing people. He stole the hearts. But they just want to be honored. They want to be praised. They want to be obeisance. To be obeisance. To show obeisance is to bow down, to be humbled before. To like, oh, you're so great. I hate it. The real leaders are out tending sheep, and they're too busy for the honorifics and stuff like that. Verse 6 shows the sole intent right here is he stole the hearts of men. They were not his, so he stole them. That's what a sheep stealer does. And then sheep stealers lie about shepherding sheep. If you look at verses 7 and 8, and it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow, for I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. For thy servant vowed a vow while abroad at Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. Way to hide that one. Way to hold out. Where'd that come from? I don't recall reading that anywhere. I don't recall any vow. They lie about shepherding. Sheep stealers lie about what they're doing. Oh, yeah, I'm in ministry. We got so many people, and I'm so wise, and I study the Bible all the time. That's the first time I've heard anything about Absalom's vow. What?
I'm just staring right at you.
Whoa, man.
Sorry.
And go. Sisters fighting, man. Okay. So 40 years later, way to hold out for 40 years. Way to hold out. Good. I've been so burdened. God, there's this guy, Southern Church. I can't tell you how many times he told me he's going to quit work, full-time ministry. Stood up in church on numerous occasions and committed himself to full-time ministry. Still has a job. There are those who will tell you what they're going to do, and then there are those who will do what they tell you they're going to do. And they're so easily spotted. Sheep stealers like to talk about leading people more than they like leading sheep. They're just unwilling to be followers. Absalom's never expressed any desire to follow anybody, but he vowed a vow when he was running away from the murder rap that if he ever went back, he'd serve the Lord. Okay, 40 years. Okay. And what do sheep stealers do? They steal sheep. In verses 9 through 12, look in verse 11, really. Look in 9, whatever. And the king said unto him, go in peace, and he rose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel. Oh, he's doing it the right way. And as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. Bring out your dead. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. Sheep trust their shepherd with their safety. The shepherd is a sheep stealer. They're just not saved. Got to be really careful who we're looking at for advice and following, and the guy sitting at the gate. I remember when we got our rear ends handed to us in our church. When they brought in the Church of Christ once, and we were going to just kill them. They gave them the pulpit and everything. It was like a big event. It was a Thursday night, and Church of Christ came in there, and we had it all planned out. Like I had a section. I was going to ask some questions, and the first guy out of the back So these were a Church of Christ. They showed up with the Campbellites in around 1840 something and 50 something, right? They never existed anywhere before that. And the point was, where was your church before this, right? That was kind of like, where was your church during the Laodicean church period, or rather the Philadelphian church period? Where were you in who believed what you believe in 300 AD, right? So the first question out of the elder in the church, I had just been there for weeks. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, this guy's somebody. He's like, he's somebody. And he got something and goes, oh, where was you in 1868? And that was his question. We worked on this for weeks now. We all had a section of church history to kind of drive him through. And the guy looked at him and says, oh, I wasn't even born yet. Pandemonium. I mean, pandemonium. And that church came into our house and handed us our rear ends that night. They handed it to us because we had, and this guy wound up, strangely enough, after so remember the guy that shot his wife and his grandson while they were sleeping one night? It was his funeral. And so they left after that and started their own church, took a bunch of people, sheep stealers. He didn't want to go through the motions of being a leader. He didn't want to follow a leader. He just wanted to be a leader. So he secretly built up a group of people and took them. Hey, if that's how you want to do it. Sheep stealers are never satisfied. They always want more sheep. Look in verse 12. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo. And he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. So he steals the hearts and minds. He gets a bunch of people that don't know any better. He tricks them in their simplicity. They knew not anything. And the conspiracy was strong. So nothing about this is right. But it all started back when David would set boundaries for his people. Okay. Next. Chapter 15, verse 13 through 23 is about loyalty. This is a story about Ittai the Gittite, the Hittite. Gittite, Hittite, same thing. What? I could rap that. Ittai the Gittite. He comes from the same family that Uriah came from. Goliath of Gath was a Gittite. But this guy's a loyal servant. It's funny when I study the Bible how men and women, the women are really leaders and the men aren't. And God's enemies are doing the right things. And God's people are doing the wrong things. Strange, but true. This is Ittai the Gittite. And there's 6 things that I wanted to tell you about there. If there was a 7th thing, I would have to make it up. So there's 6 things I want to show you about Ittai the Gittite. Look in verse 13 through 19. There came a messenger to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto his servants, and they were with him at Jerusalem, arise, let us flee, for we shall not escape. For we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring evil upon us and smite the city with the edge of the sword. Okay. And the king's servant said unto the king, behold, thy servants are ready to do whatsoever my lord the king shall appoint. And the king went forth and all his household with him. And the king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house. And the king went forth and all his people after him. Left them in there. Here, guard the store. Here's a knitting needle. Fight them off. And he tarried in a place that was far off. And all his servants passed on beside him. And all the Wolfothites and the Puphothites and all the Gittites, 600 men, which came after him from where? Gath, passed on before the king. Then said the king to Ittai the Gittite, wherefore goest thou also with us? Return to thy place and abide with the king, the other king, the guy that proclaimed himself king. He said, look, get out of here. What are you doing? You're a stranger. You're in exile. Whereas thou camest but yesterday, should I this day make thee go up and down with us? Seeing I go whither I may, return thou and take back thy brethren. Mercy and truth be with thee. Loyalty does not depend on the circumstances. David was not in a good circumstance. People are always loyal when things are going great. When things are going great, I mean, the last days of the Trump administration. I'm not saying I blame them, but man, they were flying out of there like crazy, man. Like Kayleigh McEnany's gone. What's her name? The blonde lady, the spokesman, the one that talked a lot. She's gone. I'm like, what? She quit? Sinking ship, rats and sinking ship. But loyalty doesn't depend on the circumstances. David gave up his throne without a fight against 200 people. David, the king of all of Israel, gave up his throne because 200 people went out with Absalom. But Ittai the Gittite knew who the real king was. Stop laughing when I say Ittai the Gittite. Ittai the Gittite. Okay. He knew who his king was. David even said, go back with the king. And God goes, I am. Like, I'm here. I ain't going anywhere. That was the obvious safe move for Ittai, the Gittite. The safe move would be to get as far away from David as possible and his people, 600 of them. Now, this is weird. David's got at least 600 people, and he's running away from 200. I mean, it increased a lot, but you get the picture. David's the king, but he's not acting like it. He leaves 10 concubines. Was it 10 or 20 concubines to guard the house? Mm-hmm. So you guys stay here. And they're like, you're just concubines. It's not like your wives or anything. Like, David has a problem. David's the king, but he's not acting like it. Ittai is acting like a true loyal person. It's not predicated on your subject of loyalty behaving correctly. God's loyal to me when I'm not behaving correctly. Even when he's punishing me, he's only doing what he told me he would do. He's being loyal and saying, I told you I'd do this. I'm like, yeah, I know. All right. Loyalty is decisive and cannot be dissuaded. Verse 20, whereas thou camest but yesterday, should I this day make thee go up and down? In verse 21, and he answered the king, as the Lord liveth, as my Lord the king liveth, surely in what place my Lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also will thy servant be. Who does that remind you of? Ruth and Naomi. Where you go, I'll go. Where you lodge, I'll lodge. If you die, I'll die. She knew where her loyalties was. Even when Ruth had nothing to offer her, she just got done telling her, I got nothing. And even if you waited, would you wait? Even if I should have someone tonight, would you wait for my sons? She was loyal. It can't be dissuaded. He says, go bide with the king. He goes, that's what I'm doing. He's telling Ittai, you're all right, man. Go to your place, take your people, peace and safety to you. He goes, yep, I'm right here. He's loyal. There's 2 kings there, but Ittai knows who the real king is, and he sticks with the guy who appears to be losing because he's loyal. Like, all right, if God wants me dead, I'm dead. Okay. Loyalty cannot be compelled or demanded, or it's just fealty. It's just obeisance. It's not loyalty. Being a you-know-what kisser is not being loyal. And you can make people do that with power if you want, but David's trying not to do that. There's still good in David. David's got a lot of good in him. But David's done his best to ensure that he's putting no pressure on Ittai to stay. He's not trying to shame him into staying. He's not trying to coerce him into staying. He's not saying, if you ever leave this church, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're wrong. He's saying, do what's best for you. And Ittai's going, I am. I'm sticking with the king. It pays off for him, but he doesn't know that. The fourth thing is, you need to be loyal. If you're loyal to someone, it doesn't matter how long you've been together. Thou camest but yesterday in verse 20. They had one day in service of the king. He goes, that's enough. 1 year, that's enough. 20 years, that's enough. And being loyal for 20 years doesn't make you any more loyal than the guy that came yesterday and who's loyal. Loyalty is loyalty. It doesn't change. And it's very public. You don't hold back on this thing. Look in verse 21. And Ittai answered the king and said, as the Lord liveth, and as my Lord the king liveth, surely in what place my Lord shall be, whether in death or life, even there also will thy servant be. And David said to Ittai, go and pass over. And Ittai the Gittite passed over, and all his men, and all the little ones that were with him. It was public. It was a public declaration. And, he followed through. He didn't just say it. He went over. He didn't say it and then disappear from history. He said it, and he took his whole group of people, even his little ones. He didn't send his little ones back home with the concubines to guard the store. He took everyone. Everyone with him was in it with him too. Okay, the last one. To be true loyalty. God. I'm going to take a commercial break here. Take another shot. To be truly loyal is to cast your fate in together with the object of your loyalty. And he did. He said in verse 20, and Ittai the Gittite, you laugh, I'll smack you, passed over. Loyalty rubber meets the road when we see that loyalty will cost us something. And Ittai was making a choice that could have cost him his life and his people's life and his family's life and his little one's life, but he stuck with it. Now, I made some decisions. Now, we live here now. There was a certain amount of gnashing of teeth over that subject. I'll tell you that. But Ittai did what he told David he would do. There's two types of people that will tell you what they're going to do. They're not necessarily the same as the people who do what they tell you they're going to do. Paul writes to the saints and faithful brethren. They're not the same people. All people at church who are saved are saints, but they're not all faithful brethren. Loyalty means you cast your lot in with each other. Ruth was loyal to Naomi. Ittai is loyal to David. It's just the way it is. David was loyal to Samuel. Jonathan, Ittai. David was loyal to Saul because he was supposed to be, even when Saul was behaving incorrectly. Okay, I'm not going to have time to finish. Oh, one more. Come on, we're going to finish this last one. This is a Bob principle, the that which seemeth good principle. And that's chapter 15, verses 23 through 37. I won't read them. You can read them. I know you all read this before. So. 1 Peter 2:19 tells us that if we're suffering for conscience towards God enduring grief, that's thankworthy. But he goes on to say that it's no glory when we're buffeted for our faults. Like, oh, I'm suffering so much. Well, maybe that's because you, I don't know, didn't set any boundaries for your kids, and now your kid wants to kill you. Maybe that, right? I mean, it's thankworthy if you're enduring grief, suffering wrongfully. God will thank you for that. But it's not if you caused it. Sin has consequences. David's attitude shows us that which seemeth good principles. You can read this chapter. I'll give you the bullets. When we accept what seemeth good, we hold on to power by letting God have all of it. You'll see that in 15, 23 through 28, and in verses 34 and 35. He's fleeing the city in defeat, had some loyal men, and he had one thing that would hold power. The one thing that he had that would hold power was the ark, but he sends it back. He sends the ark back where it belongs. The last time we saw the ark brought into a situation was brought into a war they shouldn't have been in, and it got taken by the Philistines, and they got the emeralds for it. Okay. Well, the second thing is when potty humor is funny, or we wouldn't laugh at it. Okay, here we go. That's when we accept what seems good principle. When we accept what seemeth good, we're broken about our sin and our chastisement. You see that in 15 verse 30. 15, I'll even read that verse, 15:30. And David went up to by the ascent of Mount Olivet, and wept as he went up, and had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went. He is broken about his sin. He's broken about his chastisement. He had to be thinking, if I had only done right by this kid, I wouldn't be running away barefoot up in this mountain. I'd be at home with my concubines. But David's first move here was to prayer. And instead of the most obvious response, which when someone we love or have loved claim to love us does something against us, I reach for the 9mm, but that's just me. The next thing is that when you accept what seemeth good, you worship instead of whine about God. And that's what we see David doing in chapter 15, verse 32. And it came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mount where he worshiped God, behold, Hushai the Archite. There you go. Ittai the Gittite. Hushai the Archite. Do a limerick on that bad boy. Came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. David goes up to worship. Instead of whining, he worships. That which seemeth good. David was able to worship instead of being bitter because he's in the that which seemeth good mode. If God's doing it, and I believe it, and all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose, then David can be content in that. And the last one is, when we accept what seemeth good, we'll be surrounded by loyal friends. Here you go in verse 37. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. So David sends these guys back into Jerusalem to see what's going on. They went. What? Because they were loyal. And why was he able to do that? Because he was content. So that was seen with good principle. I made that up all by myself.
Aw.
That's it. That'll be the end of our evening together, folks. Please stay tuned for an important word from our sponsors.
What was the last verse?
1537. Turn that thing off.
Yeah, pray.
Oh, let's pray. Well, we thank you, praise you for your son, Jesus. Lord, thank you for this section of the Bible. Applying it to my life is a lot harder than talking about it. But I pray that I not only hear what you have to say, that I would do these things also. Bring us back together on Sunday. Give me the right words to say. And in Jesus' name I pray, amen.